Hi, I'm Mr. Dark Web, and today I will guide you into a world where reality is so skillfully manipulated that even the smartest can fall into a trap. The Darknet is a place where technology turns from entertainment into a formidable weapon of deception. The story I found on a closed forum will show how one person exploited the trust of a large international company by using fake faces, voices, and illusions. Imagine that important business decisions are being made with technologies that can create lies that seem true. This story will tell you how a fraudster tricked the system by creating an illusion that cost the company millions of dollars. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the most interesting and captivating stories from the world of the Darknet. Give it a like if you're curious to learn about the most unexpected ways modern technologies can change our lives, and share your thoughts in the comments. Could you recognize the deception if you found yourself in such a situation? Here in the Darknet, there's no room for weakness. Every step is a risk, and every truth is a lie in new packaging. I will guide you through this tangled maze and show you how one person pulled off a scam that shook an entire company. Ready? Then let's begin. Hey, what's up everyone? I'm the Master of Illusions. I want to share a story with you that still brings me satisfaction every time I think about it. This is not just a tale of a successful case or a brilliant scam. It's my revenge against those who decided they could toss me aside like a useless tool after I gave everything for their success. A few years ago, I worked for a large international company, the name of which I will, of course, keep secret. I started like everyone else, from the bottom, but I quickly rose to the top. It all started when I was young and ambitious, with a head full of ideas. My first position in this company was, to put it mildly, far from the managerial roles I dreamed of. I started as a simple analyst. I sat in a small office on the 6th floor, surrounded by piles of papers and spreadsheets that needed to be turned into understandable reports for management. My job was to collect data, analyze it, and draw conclusions about the company's situation. It was routine, but I always tried to add something of my own. Not just dry numbers, but interpretations, forecasts, and suggestions for improving processes. This, in fact, became my ticket to the top. The management quickly noticed that my reports were not just a summary of numbers, but real action plans. They saw that I wasn't afraid to take responsibility and propose new ideas. They started to involve me in more serious projects, where I was no longer just collecting data, but also helping to develop strategies for the business. My boss liked my approach, and soon I was promoted to senior analyst. After a few successful years of work, I was entrusted with the leadership of a small team. I became a business development manager. Now I was not just analyzing data, but also developing long-term strategies for the company, collaborating with clients, negotiating, and closing deals. I started traveling around the world, meeting with partners in other countries, looking for new markets and opportunities for business expansion. My mind was always operating a few steps ahead. I saw opportunities where others saw problems. I created projects that generated millions. A few years later, I was promoted to Director of Strategic Development. It was more than just leading a team. I became a part of the company's top management, the one who made decisions together with the top management. My word became important, and every idea I proposed had a real impact on the company's future. My responsibilities became even broader. I was now responsible for developing and implementing new development strategies, analyzing markets, finding new business opportunities, and managing risks. I was the one behind the strategic decisions that brought in millions. I saw myself not just as a cog in a big machine, but as its driving force. However, like any success story, mine had its dark side. As soon as I started to reach the top, there were those around me who were jealous and wanted to take my place. However, they were not a threat to me because I knew from the very beginning that they were jealous of me, and I knew how to beat them. I saw their weaknesses, understood their motives, and it kept me a few steps ahead. I knew that if any of them tried to go against me, I would always find a way to take them out of the game. But the real threat was not where I expected it to be. The real threat to me was the son of the company's founder. He was young and inexperienced, but ambitious. And unfortunately, he had a lot of influence thanks to his father. He started pushing his ideas, but most of them were not just bad. They could have caused serious damage to the company. I saw this and tried to reject his suggestions for the good of the company. Every time he brought a new idea, I found arguments why it wouldn't work. At first, he took it as constructive criticism, but eventually he began to realize that I was standing in his way. I wasn't doing it on purpose, but really wanted to protect the company from risky decisions. But he didn't see it as a concern for the business. He saw me as an enemy blocking his progress. The situation escalated when his ideas were completely ignored by the board of directors. He realized that it was because of me, and he took action. At first, he tried to convince other board members that I was sabotaging the company's development by putting my interests above the corporate ones. He insinuated that I wanted to run everything myself, that I had turned into a dictator who didn't give others a chance. And in the end, his influence and connections played their part. One day I was informed that I was no longer suitable for my position. They found someone else who could take my place. It was not just a blow to my ego. I was not just pushed out, I was betrayed. But what infuriated me the most was their arrogance and meanness. They didn't even try to hide it. They laughed in my face, putting me in my place as a clumsy favorite who didn't even understand how business works. My merits, years of work, all of this was thrown in the trash, as if I had never done anything. But the worst part is the feeling that they thought I would just accept it and leave. They thought they had won, and it made me want to show them how wrong they were. Realizing that they wanted to get rid of me was not as easy as it might seem at first glance. It didn't happen overnight, like a bolt from the blue. It was a gradual process, skillfully disguised under the guise of corporate changes and restructuring. But let's take it one step at a time. At first, everything went on as usual. My ideas were worth their weight in gold, and each of them was admired by the management. I was invited to all the important meetings where my proposals were discussed on a par with the highest decisions. I felt on top of the world, confident that nothing could shake my position. But then something changed. At first, it was minor details that most people would not pay attention to. I was no longer invited to some meetings that used to be mandatory for my department. I put it down to routine work moments. Maybe there was just no need for my presence. Then my reports started to receive less attention. They were no longer discussed at the meetings, but simply taken as a note. It was strange considering that before, every document I wrote had caused a wave of discussion. The next signal was the approach to decision-making. Previously, all my ideas had gone through without any delays, but now every word I said was being questioned. More and more time was spent discussing small details that had not even been raised before. This was not criticism, but rather an attempt to push me into the background. I began to notice that my proposals were often postponed or discussed without my input. One day, at a regular meeting, I noticed the way the son of the company's founder was looking at me. It was not just the look of a colleague or partner. There was something more in it, a hidden intention, a dissatisfaction that had been brewing for a long time. His suggestions, which I had rejected earlier, began to gain more and more support. I realized that it was not because of their quality, but because someone was actively working behind my back. The real blow came when I started to be ignored. One by one, important decisions were made without my input. The feeling that I was falling out of the game became inevitable. I used to be part of the inner circle where all the key decisions were made, but now I was simply not informed about important meetings or found out about them at the last minute. It was a subtle but very effective way to push me to the sidelines. I watched a coalition form around me that I could not control. They were new faces, young and ambitious, ready to obey every word of the founder's son. They supported his ideas in every way, even if they were absurd. I saw this group gaining strength and realized that their goal was to eliminate me. The culmination was when, during one important meeting to discuss the company's new strategy, I expressed my opinion, which differed from that of the founder's son. Previously, such situations were the norm, and discussions often led to a compromise. But this time, everyone who had previously supported me remained silent. It was a tacit agreement that my opinion no longer mattered. After this meeting, it became clear to me that I was being pushed out. They weren't trying to expel me directly, they were just creating the conditions for me to want to leave. It was a subtle and sophisticated mockery that was intended to break me morally. But they did not know one thing. I was several steps ahead. At that moment, I was already developing a plan for my revenge, and I knew that I would deal them a blow they would never forget. When you work in a large company in a high position, you have access to many resources. In my case, it was an invaluable insight into how internal processes work and access to a wealth of information. I knew everything about their financial operations, who made decisions, and how and what weaknesses there were in their security system. I spent months preparing. What I did was not an accident or an impulsive decision. It was a carefully thought-out plan, with every step of the way essential to success. As you already know, I had access to many of the company's internal resources, but that was only the beginning. My plan required something more, reliable and anonymous ways to transfer the stolen funds to accounts that no one could trace. Fortunately, I knew an old friend who could help me with this. His nickname was Bob. He was a master at his craft, specializing in setting up and maintaining accounts in banks where the identification requirements were not as strict as in most other countries. Bob was in the business of illegal money transfers, and that was his territory. I've known Bob since we first started our careers. He was always someone who liked to take risks, looking for workarounds and opportunities. While I chose the path of legitimate career advancement, Bob chose a darker path. He was aware of all the shadow financial flows, understood how banks worked in countries where bubbles could be created and destroyed almost without a trace. My plan called for setting up a number of corporate accounts in Turkey, a country where financial controls are quite lax and banks can turn a blind eye to certain details if done correctly. I knew I couldn't do it alone, so I turned to Bob. I described the situation to him without going into all the details. I didn't want him to know too much, but it was enough for him to know that I asked him to set up a few accounts that could be used to transfer significant amounts of money. He agreed, of course, not without interest in his share of the business. His remuneration depended on the success of the operation, so he was interested in doing everything perfectly. Bob was a professional in his field. He knew which banks to choose, who to contact, and what documents were needed. He quickly organized all the necessary paperwork, using frontmen and fake company documents, and he had his own people who specialized in this kind of thing. Everything was done flawlessly. Within a few weeks, I had a dozen accounts ready to receive funds. Each of these accounts was as anonymous as possible. They were opened for different people, most of whom did not even exist. Thanks to Bob, I not only had access to these accounts, but I also had a plan in case something went wrong. He knew how to quickly transfer the money into cryptocurrency and disperse it into different wallets so that it would be almost impossible to trace. This was the insurance that gave me confidence that I would go unnoticed. We agreed that after the transfers were made, Bob would quickly transfer the money to the cryptocurrency accounts and split it into small pieces, which would then go to different wallets. This way, even if someone starts an investigation, it will be very difficult for them to trace all the transactions, let alone find the final recipient. This process was like preparing for a chess game with dozens of moves in advance. Every account, every move was thought out to the smallest detail. It was a true art of deception, and Bob, like me, enjoyed every moment of it. When all the accounts were ready, and we made test transfers to make sure everything worked, I was confident that our plan would be unstoppable. We were on top, and no one even realized that at that moment we already had their business in our hands. My friend had done his part and disappeared into the shadows, leaving me with clean accounts and ready for the big finale. And that was just the beginning. Next, it became clear that I needed a technology that could fool even the most vigilant eyes. It wasn't a simple idea that just popped into my head on its own. One day, my old friend, a programmer, and I started talking about his projects. He was working in the field of artificial intelligence, and as usual, he liked to talk about his latest achievements and projects. That time, he talked about how he was working on a project related to deepfake technologies. He explained how artificial intelligence can be used to create realistic videos by imitating people's faces, voices and mannerisms so accurately that they are almost indistinguishable from the real thing. I was interested in the idea. I immediately saw how it could be used in my plan. But there was one but. I had no experience with such technologies. My knowledge of programming was limited, and I realized that I needed to learn it thoroughly to avoid making any mistakes. So I started to communicate more with this programmer. At first, it was just small talk, during which I showed a sincere interest in his work. I knew that he valued friendship and support, so I gradually convinced him that we had become real friends. He believed that I admired his achievements and was happy to share his knowledge with me. I invited him to lunch several times to expand our communication beyond work-related topics. He trusted me more, and each time we delved deeper into the technical aspects of deepfake. I asked a lot of questions, trying to understand how the process works from start to finish. He even agreed to show me in practice how to create such videos using the tools available to him. Of course, he didn't know why I was really studying this. He thought I was just interested in technology and wanted to understand its potential. But I gathered information, accumulated knowledge, and gradually started testing the creation of deepfake videos on my own. At first, it was just simple experiments, but every day I became more and more confident. Soon, I had the necessary skills and tools to create a realistic deepfake, and that's when I decided it was time to put this knowledge to work for me. My programmer friend never understood what I was really trying to achieve. For him, it was just friendship and a common interest in new technologies, but for me, it was the key to my revenge. The first step was simple. I created a fake image of the company's CFO. Imitating his face, voice, and mannerisms was not as difficult as it might seem. Thanks to the video conferences, meetings, and public speeches that this guy held, I collected enough material to create the most realistic deepfake possible. However, before giving the order for large transfers, I decided to conduct a test call to make sure that everything worked flawlessly and that the company's employees would not suspect anything strange. I prepared a short script for this call, deciding that it would be a normal conversation with one of the middle managers. No specific tasks or orders, just a casual conversation to see if they would accept me as a real CFO. I scheduled the call for a time when most of the managers were still at their desks. Using my deepfake, I dialed the number of one of the employees who was responsible for preparing the financial reports. He was a middle-aged man who had been with the company for a long time and knew the CFO personally. The image and voice transmitted over the video link were perfect. I greeted him, recalling a few minor details from his work that I had been able to learn earlier. We discussed a few minor aspects of the financial statements and general questions about preparing for the annual report. I kept watching his reaction, trying to catch any hint that he was suspicious, but everything went smoothly. He behaved as if he was talking to a real CFO. Not for a moment did he doubt that he was talking to someone he knew well. We ended the call after a few minutes of chatting, and I ended the conversation with standardized phrases, which further cemented the sense of authenticity. After this test call, I was finally convinced that deepfake worked flawlessly. The company's employees had no suspicions, accepting me as the real CFO. This was the last check before I decided to move on to the main part of my plan. From now on, I knew for sure that I would be able to manipulate them when the time came to act for real. The next step was to convince the finance department to transfer the funds to my accounts. I decided that instead of making a general call to all members of the finance department, I would act in a targeted manner, contacting each key employee individually. This was to maximize efficiency and avoid unnecessary suspicion. The first person I contacted was the head of the finance department, who was a key decision-maker in large transfers. In the conversation, I maintained a confident, even slightly condescending tone that was typical of a CFO. We talked about the need to close several large transactions quickly, emphasizing that these transactions had been personally approved by senior management. I had already prepared a plan that included details of fictitious transactions to convince him that all the transactions were real. I knew he was cautious and required clear arguments for any decisions. The conversation started with a discussion of a few deals that I thought might be of interest to the management. I mentioned the deals with new partners in Asia and Europe, emphasizing that these contracts were part of a larger strategy to enter new markets. I talked about partners he had never heard of, but who looked extremely convincing because of the details I had prepared in advance. I mentioned that these partners specialized in developing cutting-edge technologies that were to become the basis for the company's new products. This sounded like a strategically important step for the company, and it was the kind of deal that had often been approved in the past. I also added that these projects were personally approved by the company's founder to give the words more weight. The key point was how I presented these deals. I emphasized that they had been agreed upon at the highest level, as if it was a decision by the founder himself that just needed to be implemented. I told him that the documents were ready and that all that was left was to make the transfers to complete the deals. The head of finance was cautious as usual, but I felt that my strategy was effective. I added one more detail. I said that the company's founder had personally insisted that these deals remain secret until they were fully completed to avoid information leaks and possible actions by competitors. This was very similar to decisions that had already been made before, and the head of the finance department took it for granted. To build his confidence, I invited him to a short internal briefing with several other key executives, who were, of course, just as deepfakes as the CFO. During this briefing, all participants confirmed the importance of the deals and the need for quick action. This was a crucial moment. The head of finance was now fully convinced that everything was going according to plan, and that he was doing what was expected of him. Thus, I made him feel that he was part of an extremely important and strategic process where everything had to go according to schedule and without delay, and he, of course, agreed to make the necessary transfers, not realizing that this whole performance was created to manipulate him. Next, I contacted the accountant who oversaw the daily financial operations. I spoke to him in a more relaxed manner, as if it were a routine check on the state of affairs. I told him that I wanted to make sure that all the necessary funds were transferred to the appropriate accounts on time, and emphasized that this needed to be done in the next few hours. The accountant calmly assured me that everything was under control, and that he was already starting to prepare the documents for the transfers. I had no doubts whatsoever. Lastly, I contacted the employee responsible for financial approvals, without whose signature no major transfer could be made. I started with a question about the transactions that had already been made, and then smoothly moved on to the need to sign off on new transfers, emphasizing that these transactions were part of a larger plan by the company's management, and that it had already been agreed with the head of the finance department. Even if he had wanted to verify the truth of my words, since he did not have direct access to the management, all he could have done was ask the head of the finance department, who would have confirmed my version, since I had previously convinced him of its truth. But the employee listened attentively and did not even think to question my words, because everything sounded so familiar and believable. Each of these calls was thoughtful and precise. I realized that just one mistake would be enough to ruin the whole plan, so I chose my words and tone carefully, controlling every aspect of the conversation. All the employees I talked to took me for a real CFO and followed my instructions without any questions. Everything was so believable that the finance department did not even doubt that it was a real order from the management. This approach allowed me to avoid unnecessary attention and ensure the successful execution of a series of transfers to accounts that I had prepared in advance. Each of those I contacted was convinced they were doing their normal job, unaware that they were part of my elaborate scam. 15 transfers for a very large total amount. It was millions of dollars. None of these fools even realized they were talking to a fake. I sat in front of the screen and laughed as I watched the money flow into the Turkish bank accounts I had opened for the fake names. It was a moment of real triumph. I had won a game they didn't even know they were playing. When all the transfers were completed, I felt what is called absolute triumph. The irony is that this money came to me thanks to those who thought they were in control. But don't think that I just sat there and waited for the money to appear in my accounts. All transactions were conducted through cryptocurrencies, which made it difficult to track them. Of course, transferring money directly from the corporate account to cryptocurrency wallets would have been impossible. So I developed a more complicated scheme. Initially, the money was transferred to several offshore accounts that were registered in the names of fictitious persons. These accounts belonged to fictitious companies that, according to the documentation, were engaged in consulting services or the supply of high-tech equipment, transactions that could easily fit into the company's business processes. This was necessary to provide a convincing cover for the transactions and to avoid suspicion from the financial department. As you already know, my old friend Bob helped me with this. Then, from these offshore accounts, funds were transferred to the accounts of several online exchanges that supported cryptocurrency trading. Bob chose exchanges that had a reputation for being reliable and not too picky about the origin of funds. To create an additional layer of anonymity, the funds were split into small amounts and transferred through several different exchanges to make them difficult to trace. At each stage of the transaction, Bob used different tools to cover his tracks. After the funds were converted into cryptocurrency, they were sprayed into several wallets that I managed through dark exchanges, where anonymity was at its highest. This way, the company's money turned into a digital trail that was almost impossible to trace. This method would allow me to maintain control over the funds in the future, minimizing the risk of being exposed. I knew that the police and investigative services would spend months, if not years, trying to unravel this complex tangle of transactions I had created, and by then I was already enjoying my freedom away from their reach. I also provided myself with an alibi at the time of the transfer so that I could avoid suspicion in case of any problems. Realizing that any false step could arouse suspicion, I decided to create a flawless image of a person who did not even seem to have the opportunity to participate in these transactions. First of all, I organized a trip to another country under the guise of a vacation. I prepared tickets in advance, booked a luxury hotel, and even posted on social media that I was going on a well-deserved vacation. My plan was to appear as detached from any financial transactions as possible. During my vacation, I continued to be active on social media, posting photos and videos from the tourist destinations I visited. All this, in case of suspicion, would give the impression that I was really far away from all the events and had nothing to do with the crime. Every step I took was carefully planned to confirm my alibi. For additional protection, I also made sure that my electronic devices showed that I was abroad at the time of the transfers. I used various means of anonymization so that any attempts to trace my activities would indicate that I was engaged in something else entirely. This carefully crafted story ensured that even in the event of an investigation, I would appear to be someone who was just enjoying life, unaware of what was going on in the company. It was my way of leaving all traces in the past and ensuring my immunity. Do you know what's the funniest thing? After all this, when they realized what had happened, I was sitting in a luxury hotel on the other side of the world watching the news, trying to figure out how this could have happened. The police, their experts, they are all biting their elbows now, trying to unravel this tangle. I realize that many of you might say that it was risky, that I could have gone to jail. But guys, sometimes risk is the only way to freedom. I couldn't just walk away, leaving everything I had created to someone else. I wanted to show them that they made a big mistake when they decided to get rid of me. We've reached the end of this story, and it clearly demonstrates how dangerous the use of technology for deception and manipulation can be. Technologies designed for entertainment and improving our lives can easily turn into weapons in the hands of those who aren't afraid to break the law. But it's important to remember that such actions never lead to true success. Lies and deceit don't bring long-term benefits. They only create an illusion of success. The risks and consequences of such actions can be devastating, even if you think everything is going according to plan. Being a law-abiding citizen, striving for honest work, and respecting the rules are the only paths to real achievements. If you enjoyed this story and want to learn more about similar interesting and captivating events from the world of the Darknet, subscribe to the channel. Write in the comments if you've ever faced situations where trust turned into betrayal, or share your thoughts on modern technologies. Are they a savior or a threat? And don't forget to like the video to support the channel and help spread these stories so that more people can learn about them. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to the channel, there's much more to come. Take care and see you soon in the next video.